Hey, it's Fletch. I'm a NINA certified ENP, and here's a video copy of my latest blog, D2D and the End of the Tower-Only Era. The cell tower is not going away anytime soon. Let me get it out of the way right away before somebody in a hard hat throws a coax connector at my head. But the idea that every communications coverage problem must be solved by another tower, another fiber run, and another microwave path, along with another remote cabinet and another maintenance contract, well, that idea just took a very serious hit from orbit. All that and more are coming up next on TiPS, Today in Public Safety.
Welcome to TiPS, Today in Public Safety, your go-to podcast for today's breaking stories and public safety news. Here's your host, Fletch, with today's tips.
Welcome to TiPS, Today in Public Safety. This is Fletch. I'm a NINA certified ENP, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday I bring you the latest, most informative, and sometimes controversial takes in emergency communications. Today we're going to be talking about direct-to-device connectivity, known as D2D, where low Earth orbit satellites now can connect directly to your smartphone. Now, this is not the end of the tower era, but it is the end of the tower-only era. And that distinction matters, because when people hear direct-to-device, they tend to run to one of the two corners. Now, in one corner, we've got the space cheerleaders. They're ready to declare every cell tower is obsolete, every fiber project is unnecessary, and every rural broadband problem is completely solved. And that smartphone that you're carrying magically connects everywhere on Earth. And they usually say this with a glossy animation, a glowing satellite, and music that sounds like somebody is about to launch a superhero franchise. Now, over in the other corner, you've got the terrestrial traditionalists. They look at the satellite connectivity and they'll immediately point out latency problems, capacity issues, weather, device limitations, and spectrum constraints. They'll call off line-of-sight issues, interference concerns, and the fact that physics remains stubbornly uninterested in marketing language. Now, both sides of this argument do have points, but both sides are also missing the bigger one. You see, the future isn't space versus ground communications. The future is space plus ground communications. Wait a minute, what just changed? So the FCC recently approved a pair of major spectrum transactions that involved EchoStar, SpaceX, and AT&T. Now together, those transactions move about 115 megahertz of spectrum into an area for new use, with about 65 megahertz going to SpaceX to be used for Starlink direct-to-device services, and 50 megahertz going to AT&T to expand 5G and fixed wireless deployment. Now, that's not just a small bookkeeping change. It's not some quiet footnote that's buried in a telecom filing that only 3 attorneys and 1 deeply caffeinated spectrum engineer will ever read. No, this is a major signal from the FCC that the future of communications is moving towards a hybrid model, where terrestrial and satellite systems are not going to be treated as entirely separate universes. They're actually starting to become layers of the same network. Now, in normal human language, that means that some spectrum is going to be positioned to support the direct-to-device satellite, and some is going to be used to strengthen traditional terrestrial 5G and fixed wireless broadband. Now, that combination is actually very important. By all means, it's not the FCC saying, okay, everybody in the rocket, we're done with towers. No, this is the FCC saying, look, the network is no longer the only thing that's going to sit on a tower or be buried alongside the road. It's going to also come from space. And once that idea takes hold, broadband policy, rural deployment strategies, public safety communications planning, and carrier investment models are going to start to change. What direct-to-device actually means. The definition of direct-to-device is an ordinary consumer device, such as a smartphone, or even an IoT device, is now able to communicate directly with a low Earth orbit satellite without requiring a specialized satellite phone. And that is what the magic trick is. Now, not magic as ignore the engineering, but magic as in the customer doesn't have to understand all that complex engineering. You see, for decades, satellite connectivity usually meant specialized equipment, special antennas, special plans, and special pricing. Oh yeah, and it also needed special patience. You couldn't casually pull out your normal phone and then connect to a satellite unless your normal phone wasn't really a normal phone at all. So D2D changes that expectation. Now granted, the early versions are limited. That matters. We're talking about messaging, selected apps, emergency comms, and location sharing. Low-speed data and services that work best outdoors with a reasonable view of the sky. Now that is not the same as standing in a crowded stadium streaming 4 camera angles of a football game through a satellite connection to your phone. At least not today. But that's not really the point. The point is, if you're in a dead zone, the first question is not, can I stream a movie here? The first question is, hey, can I communicate at all? Am I able to send a message? Can I reach 911? What about my location? Can that be shared? If it's a sensor, can it report an alarm? And can a stranded driver, a hiker, a farmer or utility worker, or a remote first responder even get a signal when the tower app says, good luck, buddy? And that's the point where D2D starts to matter. The real problem, coverage has been too terrestrial. Now, for years, broadband expansion has been treated mainly as a construction problem. No coverage? Build something. No capacity? Build more of something. Need rural service? Go build something further away. And if you needed redundancy, go build something with another path. Now that works fine when the economics make sense. In dense urban areas and suburban areas, towers, fiber, small cells, fixed wireless, and wired broadband still make enormous sense. That's where the people are, that's where the traffic is, that's where the investments can easily be recovered. But the farther that you move away from population density, the uglier the math gets. You still need things like land, permitting, and you need power. You've got a wireless signal, but you still need to backhaul it to civilization. You're going to need maintenance, and you're going to need weather hardening on the equipment. You're also still going to need generator fuel and a way for somebody to actually reach the tower to fill up the fuel tank or fix it when something breaks. Oh yeah, and by the way, that's usually going to be during the kind of weather that made that site fail in the first place. And when you're located out in the Badlands, you're probably just serving a small number of customers that are spread across a huge area. Now, that doesn't mean that those customers don't matter. They absolutely do. Rural communities matter, tribal areas matter, as do farms, national parks, and remote roads. You've got offshore operations and utility corridors that absolutely matter. And as for public safety responders, they work everywhere, including outside normal coverage areas. So they matter too. And that's the problem that D2D exposes. You see, not every coverage gap is really a tower problem. Some coverage gaps are physics problems, some are geography problems, some are economic problems, and some are policy issues that are dressed up as infrastructure problems because we didn't have some other way that was a practical option. But now we may. No, the tower is not dead. Let's be clear here. The tower isn't dead, fiber's not dead, microwave's not dead, and terrestrial backhaul is not dead. And anyone that's out there saying otherwise is either overselling the moment or trying to bank an invite onto a conference keynote panel with dramatic lighting and sound. No, terrestrial networks will remain the workhorses, at least for now. They carry enormous traffic volumes, they support low latency, they're able to provide dense capacity, and they serve buildings, neighborhoods, campuses, hospitals, schools, and factories, as well as stadiums, downtowns, and suburbs. You know, all the places where people actually consume the most data. A satellite's not going to replace every fiber-fed macro site in a city. A satellite is not going to make a dense 5G network unnecessary. Satellites can't magically create unlimited capacity in every single valley, highway, and disaster zone. And when that satellite traffic comes back to Earth, it's still got to get somewhere. So, gateways, ground stations, fiber routes, data centers, cloud connections, and terrestrial interconnection still matters. Big time. So no, by no means is this a funeral for terrestrial communications. But it is a great big warning label for tower-only thinking. Why tower-only thinking is in trouble. You see, tower-only thinking assumes the solutions to a coverage problem must be a terrestrial asset. Like another site or another pole, another fiber lateral, another microwave hop, another cabinet sitting out there in the weather waiting patiently for a maintenance truck, as well as a raccoon fight over who gets inside first. D2D challenges that assumption. If a satellite layer can provide basic connectivity across remote areas, disaster zones, transportation corridors, offshore locations, agricultural regions, and that hard-to-reach terrain, then the economics behind terrestrial expansion changes significantly. Maybe you don't need to build every remote site. Maybe you don't need to maintain every marginal backhaul path forever. Maybe some rural broadband strategies shift from build everywhere to build where capacity demand justifies it, and supplement where coverage is the primary problem. That's a massive change in engineering. And what it does is create a very uncomfortable question for some local carriers and infrastructure owners. What happens when you own that infrastructure that still works just fine, but no longer makes financial sense? That's not a theoretical problem, and recent FCC activity around EchoStar also highlighted real-world concerns from tower companies, fiber backhaul providers, and construction firms tied to network infrastructure obligations. The FCC even required a multi-billion-dollar trust or escrow connected to construction, operation, maintenance, decommissioning, and related network obligations. And that's the stranded infrastructure problem that's over there waving at us from the regulatory record. And we're going to dig into that in next week's article, because a network can be functional and still become financially obsolete. And that sentence should make a few boardrooms uncomfortable. The broadband expansion impact. The most important impact of D2D may be on broadband planning. For years, broadband maps and funding programs have wrestled with the same question. How do we extend service to areas where the economics are terrible? The terrain's difficult. The population is razor thin, but the need is still very real. Now, satellite broadband already plays an important role in that discussion, but direct-to-device adds another layer because it moves connectivity closer to the device that needs it. Now that matters for emergency communications. It matters for low-density consumer coverage. It matters for IoT, and it matters for transportation and agriculture, as well as utility monitoring. And it matters where storms, fires, floods, sabotage, power failures, or even simple geography completely knock terrestrial networks out of the picture. So D2D doesn't replace the need for broadband policy. It just complicates it a little bit. But that really isn't a bad thing. It means regulators, carriers, local governments, and public safety leaders need to stop thinking in single-layer terms. The future coverage question is not going to be, do we use terrestrial or satellite? The question becomes, which layer should carry which workload? And under which conditions, carrying what performance expectation? That's the better question. And it's a much smarter question. But admittedly, it's also the harder one. Sorry about that, that's just progress, and sometimes progress is annoying. Public safety gets a seat at this table. Now there's also a public safety angle here, and it shouldn't be ignored. The FCC's supplemental coverage from space framework includes public safety considerations, including the potential use of FirstNet Band 14 for satellite supplemental coverage under the appropriate structure. Now this is important because if a first responder is outside terrestrial coverage or working in an area that terrestrial infrastructure has been damaged, The ability to maintain even limited connectivity from outer space can be meaningful, but don't oversell it. Satellite links are not replacements for a well-designed public safety communications plan. It's not a substitute for resilient land mobile radio. It's not a fix for poor coverage planning, and it's not a cure for every rural communications problem. But think about this: if the alternate is nothing, limited connectivity is not nothing. Text messages aren't nothing. A location update isn't nothing. A distress message isn't nothing. And a backup path during a disaster isn't nothing. And that's where D2D becomes operationally interesting. But not because it replaces the rest of the network. No, because it gives the rest of the network a fallback layer that never existed in the same way before. Okay, Fletch, so when does this all become real? Well, the honest answer is that D2D is already real in a limited form. But it's not yet mature broadband everywhere. You've got some consumer services that are already supporting satellite messaging, selected apps, location sharing, and emergency texting under certain conditions. Now, those services today generally require a compatible device, outdoor visibility to the sky, and a little patience with the limitations of satellite connectivity. Coming up in the next stage is going to be broader consumer availability, better device integration, and more satellite capacity, as well as better app support and improved service reliability. Now, the mature version is going to take a little longer. The FCC's performance obligations that are tied to the SpaceX spectrum package actually stretch over years, citing interim and final performance requirements that start getting tied to dates after November 2027. So that tells you something important. By no means is this a flip the switch and replace the tower grid by Friday story. No, it's a network scale transition, likely taking decades. Yeah, limited services are here, useful services are quickly emerging, and the broad practical adoption is going to grow through the late 2020s, with right now the more mature impact arriving in the 2030s. Now, that may sound slow, but in telecom infrastructure, that's practically a sprint with coffee. No pun intended. Oh, who am I kidding? Of course it was intended. Now, that may sound slow, but it's really not. The bottom line. Here's the bottom line on this. Direct-to-device connectivity does not mean the end of terrestrial networks, but it does mean the end of pretending that terrestrial networks are the only answer. Towers are still going to matter. Fiber is still going to matter. Backhaul will still matter, as well as dense terrestrial capacity still mattering. But coverage in the future is going to become layered. The network is going to become hybrid. Space is going to be part of the access architecture. No longer is it going to be just a specialized service for people with unusual equipment and very expensive plans. No, that's going to change the broadband expansion conversation because it changes rural coverage economics. It changes public safety resilience planning, and it changes carrier investment strategies. Now, yeah, it may leave some infrastructure owners staring at perfectly good functional assets that are suddenly a lot harder to justify. And that's an area where all this gets a little uncomfortable. And that's exactly where we're going next. This is Fletch. Remember to like and subscribe, and be sure to tune in for next week's episode. Hey, it's Fletch. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you learned something new. Remember to catch all of my previous episodes of TiPS, Today in Public Safety, published every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on most social media platforms, and streaming 24/7 at 911tips.com. My blogs are located at fletch.tv, and my personal website is at fletch911.com. Remember to like and subscribe. It really helps out the algorithms. And if you're in public safety, thanks for what you do every single day. We'll catch you next time. Take care.
You've been listening to TiPS, Today in Public Safety, your go-to podcast for today's breaking stories and public safety news. Hosted by Fletch and available every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Catch past episodes on 911tips.com. Be sure to like and subscribe, and remember to join us each week for the latest on NG 911. I am Spider Harrison, the official 911 voiceover dude. Catch me on Sirius XM on various channels, including 90s on 9, the 10 spot, and on the Weekend Countdown on Hits 1. Or don't regret it for the rest of your life. Either way, I'm good.